Welcome back. Pull the door closed behind you. If this is your first time here, good. You found the right place at the right hour. I want to start simply tonight. No preamble. Just this. There are 7 accounts waiting for you, and most of them begin the same way. Every strange thing begins with a detail so small the narrator almost didn't mention it. A clock in the wrong position, a rope tied to a gate, a man standing at the same point on a road that someone else saw standing there 15 years before. These are stories about the moment just before you know something is wrong. The gap between noticing and understanding. That gap can last a second for some of the people in these accounts. It lasted years. If you're returning to the channel, thank you. If you've been here before, you know what we do here. No theatrics, no jumps, just accounts. If this is your first time, subscribe. This is the kind of place you come back to, settle in. Lower the lights, put the headphones on if you have them. Let's begin. The house that would not be entered. I was 36 and in the middle of a divorce when I moved to Oaxacan, a suburb about 40 minutes outside Tokyo, by the Chuo line. I had taken a 1-year contract with a civil engineering subcontractor doing site assessments for residential developments, and the apartment my company arranged was on the ground floor of a clean, quiet building near the station. I didn't ask many questions, I just needed somewhere to be. The neighborhood was the kind of place that ran on a specific unspoken rhythm. Residents walked dogs at the same time each morning. The tofu vendor came on Wednesdays. The vending machines between the station and the main road got restocked on Friday afternoons. I liked this. After 2 years of things not working the way they were supposed to, I found the predictability comforting. The house I want to tell you about was on Aobadori, the street I took when I walked home from the station. It was a traditional single-story structure, wood frame with a stone-tiled path and a short garden wall. The kind of house that would appear unremarkable in any context. The kind that was probably built in the late Showa period. The garden was kept. The stone path was swept. The outside light came on at dusk every evening. The curtains moved sometimes in the wind. No one went in or out. I noticed this the way I notice most things, as a structural observation first. Site work trains your eye for occupancy. After 3 weeks of walking past that house twice a day, I realized I had never seen the front gate open. And nothing. I stopped thinking about it. I had never seen a car in the narrow side lane. I had never seen anyone on the stone path. The evening light coming on was on a timer. The curtains, as far as I could tell, moved only when the windows were cracked open, which happened on warmer evenings, likely for ventilation. Automated. All of it automated. I told myself the owner was elderly and rarely visible, or perhaps lived with a family member and kept unusual hours. This is a very ordinary thing in Japanese residential neighborhoods. It meant nothing. I stopped thinking about it. And nothing. I stopped thinking about it. What I did not stop thinking about was the rope. It was tied to the left gate post. Not prominently. I only noticed it because one afternoon in early November the light was different. Lower, angled, and it caught the texture. A rice straw rope, the kind I recognized from shrine gates, Shimenawa or something similar, tied in a clean half loop and knotted to the post at about knee height. The other end was attached to a flat river stone, which sat on the ground just inside the stone path. I know what that kind of rope means in a rough sense. It marks a boundary, a protective threshold. You see them at shrines, at old sacred trees, sometimes at the corners of certain traditional properties. I'm not a superstitious person, but I know the function, the way you know what a traffic barrier means without having studied road engineering. I did not think about it again for 2 weeks. Then in November I came home late from a site in Hachioji, past 11 p.m., tired, hungry. I was nearly past the house on Obadori when I heard the gate open. I stopped. I turned. There was a man standing in the gateway. I use the word man because I cannot use any other word accurately. He was the right height. He was standing on 2 feet, upright, in the ordinary way. He was wearing a dark work jacket. He was looking at me. I said the usual sumimasen, sorry to bother you, just walking past. My Japanese was functional but not fluid. He did not respond. He stood in the gate and looked at me, not aggressive, not frightened. He was just there, looking at me, the way you might look at something you were expecting. I kept walking. I told myself he was a homeowner checking on a noise. I told myself he had just arrived home and was surveying the street, the way people do. I told myself any number of things. I was tired and hungry, and I did not want to spend energy on it. But when I reached the corner and glanced back, and I did glance back, I always glance back when I feel uncertain, the gate was closed. The stone path was empty, the evening light was on, no sound of a door, no footsteps, no car. No figure on the path between the gate and the house. I am still unable to explain the speed of that. From the time I stopped and looked at him to the time I reached the corner and turned was, at most, 30 seconds. The path from the gate to the front door was perhaps 6 meters. I was back at the house the next morning. I do not know why. Professional habit, maybe. When something in a structure does not add up, you look again in daylight. The gate was shut. The rope was there. The stone was there. The path was swept. I knocked. No answer. I spoke to my building manager that weekend. He was a careful, polite man in his 60s who had been running the building for 20 years and knew the neighborhood thoroughly. I told him I had noticed the house seemed empty. I described it neutrally. I did not mention the man. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the house had been unoccupied for 4 years, since the last resident, an elderly woman, had moved to a care facility. Her son maintained the property remotely, the timed light, the garden service, ventilation. It was a common arrangement for families who had not yet decided what to do with an inherited property. And the rope, I asked. He looked at me carefully, not unkindly. He said the rope was placed there by a neighbor, a woman in her 70s who lived 3 doors down. A precaution, he said. He used the word in the way you say something factual about an arrangement you find embarrassing but cannot argue with. I asked what kind of precaution. He said that the house had been empty for 4 years, that in the 3rd year people on the street had begun noticing something. A man standing in the gate at night, looking out toward the road. They had assumed it was the son visiting. Then someone spoke to the son. He had not been to the property in 11 months. He kept a log of when he had visited. He was able to show it to people. The neighbor had placed the rope in the 4th year. Since then, the figure had not been seen until the night I walked past. I did not go that route again. I took the longer road home that added 8 minutes to my walk. I kept this up for the remaining 7 months of my contract. My colleagues asked why I was always coming from the wrong direction. I told them there was construction on the other way. It was not true. I did not care that it was not true. What I think about still is the following. The figure was not seen for the whole of the 4th year. It had been contained or deterred or something, and the night I walked past it was standing in the gate. I was a stranger on that street. I was not a resident. The rope, whatever it was not doing it for me. It was doing it for the people who lived there. The people it already knew. I was simply someone who had not known to stay away. March, during a week-long safety audit, I was asked to verify the locker room roster against the physical lockers. We had 87 lockers for a floor staff of 84. The 3 extras were tagged unassailed and had been for years, left over from when the workforce was larger. Nobody used them. Corporate had never bothered removing them. I went down the row checking names against the tag slots. Locker 85 blank. Locker 86 blank. Locker 87, I pulled at it. Locked. That was wrong. Unassigned lockers were left unlocked. Company policy. If it's locked, it's in use. I got the master key from facilities and opened it. Inside, a work jacket in the right company colors, our logo, our size codes on the tag. A pair of steel-toed boots, size 11. A clear plastic badge holder, empty. A paper bag with what looked like half a sandwich in it. Still fresh enough, there was no smell. I checked the roster 3 times. No one was assigned to Locker 87. I checked the temporary worker sheets. I checked the contractor registry. Nobody. I asked my manager. He had no record of anyone being given that locker. The facility manager did not know who it belonged to. We checked the badge system. access logs for that locker room section. The master key had last been used by me just now. Before that, the locker room had last been accessed at the end of the previous shift. The jacket was gone by Friday. Someone had cleaned the locker out. No one admitted to knowing who had put it there or taken it away. I've thought about the badge holder since. It was the right type for our plant, the kind you get issued on your first day, and it was empty. Not lost, not missing the badge, just empty. Like whoever had been using that locker was waiting to be made official. The clock that faces the door my grandmother died in October, and by early December I was in her village in the Rhodope region of Bulgaria to help sort through the house. My Bulgarian was good enough for paperwork, but not for detailed conversation with the older neighbors, so I spent most of the time working alone, going through drawers, cataloging furniture, trying to understand which objects were worth keeping and which were there only because no one had ever moved them. The house was a 3-room structure that my grandmother had lived in alone for the last 15 years of her life. The neighbors had kept an eye on her. Everything was quiet and orderly by the standards of the place. I want to describe the interior carefully because the specific arrangement mattered, and I did not understand it until later. The main room had a large wooden clock on the wall beside the front door. It was an ordinary pendulum clock, the old kind with Roman numerals, the sort you can find in half the houses in the region. What was unusual was the way it was positioned. It faced the door directly, not sideways, not on the adjacent wall, exactly opposite the front entrance, angled, so that anyone coming through the door would be looking at the clock face immediately. I moved it on my second day. I was trying to photograph the wall behind it for the estate inventory, and the clock was in the way. I unhooked it, photographed the wall, and put it on the kitchen table while I worked. An older woman came to the door that afternoon. One of the neighbors. She was perhaps 75. She spoke no English. She looked at the table where the clock was sitting, and her face changed. She pointed at the door. Then she pointed at the clock. She said something I could not fully understand, only a phrase that kept repeating, which sounded like it meant roughly that the clock was supposed to be watching, supposed to be looking at the door. I thanked her and she left. I put the clock back that evening facing the door. It seemed easier. The following morning, I found the front door open. I had locked it the night before. Not open wide, just slightly ajar. The latch had not failed, it had been unlocked, then not quite pulled shut from inside or outside. I could not tell. I found one of my grandmother's cups on the floor in the main room. The cup was intact. It was just on the floor, a few meters from the table where I had left it the night before. It should not have been on the floor. I called the notary, who spoke some English. I asked him about the clock. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that some of the older houses in the village kept that arrangement, the clock facing the door. He said it was an old habit. Some people believed that a certain kind of visitor, the kind that should not enter, could not come through a door that was being watched. Something about being seen, something about not being able to cross a threshold with a witness. I asked him, a witness that is just a clock. He said the clock did not matter. What mattered was the direction of the face. I told him I had moved the clock and then replaced it. He was quiet again. He said that was probably fine now that I had put it back, but the door had been open in the morning and the cup was on the floor. I left the village 3 days early. I told myself it was because I had finished what I came to do. That was partly true. My grandmother had kept that clock facing the door for as far as I could determine, her entire adult life. She died in October in the hospital away from the house. The neighbors had been checking on the property since then. The clock had been in place. The night I moved it, even for a few hours, was the only night the door was found open in the morning. My grandmother had known the rule. She had maintained it. Whatever the arrangement protected, it protected her. I did not live in that house. The clock did not know me. I think whatever came through that door was not looking for me specifically. But I had removed the watch, even briefly, and something had checked. That is the part I cannot stop returning to. Not what I heard or saw or found, just the fact that it checked. She said it back wrong, okay. So this is embarrassing because it sounds stupid when I say it out loud. And I have told maybe 2 people, and they both thought I was confusing myself. But I know what I heard. I was living in a studio on the 14th floor in Mapo, Seoul, sharing a floor with about 16 other units. My best friend Jian lived 2 floors down. We had a thing we did. If one of us knocked on the door, we would say the other's name first, so they would know it was us and not a stranger. It was our habit. She would say my name in this specific way, drawn out like she was complaining at me. Chaiona. Just like that, I would know it was her immediately. In January, around midterms, I had been up since 5 a.m. studying. It was about 11 at night. I heard a knock, then my name Chaiona in what sounded like Jian's voice. I went to the door. I texted Jian, "Are you outside my door?" I asked if it was her. She said yes, open up. It's cold. I asked what she wanted. She said she needed to borrow my notes for the seminar. Something was wrong. I cannot say exactly what. It was the right voice. It was the right name. It was the right rhythm. But something in how she said the word notes was off. Like she had heard someone say it but was working from memory. Not wrong enough that I could point to it, just off. I did not open the door. I texted Jian, "Are you outside my door?" I texted Jian, "Are you outside my door?" She texted back, "No, I'm in bed, why?" I asked who was outside. She said she did not know. She was definitely in her apartment. I listened at the door. There was no sound of footsteps leaving, no elevator being called. I waited 5 minutes, nothing. I checked the hallway camera feed on the building app. It showed the hallway outside my door at the time I had heard the knock. Empty. No one. The knock had come from a hallway that the camera showed as empty. Jian came up the next morning. I told her everything. She sat with it for a minute. Then she said it used my name for you. The one I call you. Not her real name. Not my real name. The private one. The one between us. I moved to a different building the following semester. I told people it was because of the rent. The blessing that answered. I'm an archivist. I work with physical records, colonial-era documents, land registries, ecclesiastical correspondence, and I have spent 26 years being precise about what can and cannot be verified. I tell you this because I want you to understand the weight I give to the words I'm about to use. What I will describe happened in 2016 during the renovation of a small colonial-era chapel in a village outside Oaxaca. The structure was 240 years old, and the Cultural Institute had contracted a team to catalog and stabilize its interior before repairs. I was brought in for 4 days to examine any documents found within sealed architectural cavities, which is more common than you might expect in structures of that age. The village kept the chapel as a functioning space. Mass was still held there twice monthly. The priest who served the village was an elderly man named Padre Rufino, who had been doing so for 31 years. On my second day, one of the construction workers found a sealed cavity behind the altar platform, a small space, perhaps 40 centimeters deep, containing a bundle of cloth tied with cord. Inside, a fragment of printed prayer paper, a photograph of a woman I did not recognize, and a small figure made of wax and dried plant material. The type of object is familiar to anyone who works with folk devotional material. It was a protection object, bound with a specific intention. The photo was likely the person it was protecting. I cataloged it and set it aside for Padre Rufino to assess as was appropriate. That evening, I was the last person in the building. I was reviewing notes by lamplight. The electricity was partially functioning during the renovation. I heard someone come in through the side door. I assumed it was the site supervisor or one of the workers retrieving tools. I did not look up immediately. Then I heard the beginning of what I recognized as a blessing, the opening words of a specific prayer of protection I knew from my work with ecclesiastical records. Old Spanish, the right intonation. I assumed it was Padre Rufino. I looked up. There was a figure in the side aisle, speaking the prayer in a steady, deliberate way. The posture was correct. The voice had the cadence of a practiced liturgical voice. The words were accurate. The figure had its back to me. I said Padre Rufino's name. The figure did not stop. It continued through the prayer. I stood. I moved toward the side aisle. The figure reached the closing line, which calls on a specific divine witness by name, and then stopped. I was perhaps 5 meters away. When it turned toward me, I knew immediately it was not Padre Rufino. It was not a worker. It was not anyone I had seen at the site. I can describe what I saw only in the following way: a face that was arranged correctly in the technical sense, but which I could not place in any category of person I recognized. Not frightening in a dramatic sense, simply wrong. The way a document is wrong when a date is followed by a year that cannot exist. It looked at me. Then it left through the side door. I sat down for a long time. In the morning, I asked Padre Rufino if he had come to the chapel that evening. He had not. He had been at a wake in the next village and had not returned until after midnight. I showed him the protection object. He examined it carefully. He said that the prayer carried by the object. He recognized the formula from its type was one used to keep a specific kind of presence away from a household or place of care. I asked him, "Away from what?" He said, "Away from whoever the photograph showed." The photograph showed a woman I did not recognize, but the wax figure, I realized when I looked again, was too specific. It had proportion and detail that suggested someone had taken care, and there was a small detail I had missed in my initial catalog notation. The figure was wearing a miniature version of the kind of badge worn by institutional archivists, the kind with a lanyard and a rectangular holder, the kind I wore every day at work. I cannot verify what the figure was meant to protect. I cannot verify whether the prayer I heard completed correctly, or whether the presence that spoke, it was the one the prayer was intended to control or the one it was intended to repel. I am an archivist. I do not make claims I cannot support, but I left my badge and lanyard in the chapel when I departed the following morning. I did not go back to retrieve them. I filed my final catalog report from the city office without returning to the site. I still do not know whose photograph was in that bundle. The marker on the Vatnane Road. I have done road assessment work in remote areas for 18 years. I have driven more unmapped forest routes than most people would consider sensible for a single career. I'm telling you this not to establish credibility. You can choose to believe whatever you like, but to establish context. I am not a person who is startled by empty roads, strange weather, or unfamiliar terrain. These are my working conditions. The road in question was a secondary track in the upland region of western Norway, connecting two small agricultural communities across roughly 30 kilometers of forested plateau. I was part of a 3-person assessment team contracted to determine whether the route was viable for upgraded surface treatment. In October, the rest of the team was occupied with another section. I drove the route alone to make preliminary notes. It is important that you understand the road. It was a maintained gravel surface marked on the official infrastructure map with reflective kilometer posts at regular intervals. Not glamorous work, not unusual. The drive from the southern terminal to the northern turnoff took approximately 40 minutes at assessment speed. I noted the surface condition at each kilometer marker and flagged 2 locations for detailed inspection. I reached the northern turnoff, turned around, and drove back. On the return, I saw someone on the road. I was at kilometer marker 17, approximately 15 kilometers from the southern terminal. He was standing in the road about 200 meters ahead of me on my side of the center line. I slowed. As I got closer, I could see he was wearing a dark-colored jacket, work trousers, and boots. He was standing still, facing me. I am not alarmed by people on roads. People walk forest roads. People go off-route from trail systems. I pulled up alongside him and asked if he needed assistance. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said in Norwegian that the road was not good further along. He said it clearly and without urgency, the way you might note a factual condition. I asked what the problem was. Not good further along. He said it clearly and without urgency, the way you might note a factual condition. I asked what the problem was. He said only that the surface was poor and that it had been like that for some time. I thanked him. I told him I was here for the assessment and that was good to know. He nodded once. I drove on, I checked my notes. I had driven past kilometer 17 on the outward leg. I had flagged markers 8 and 24 for inspection. Marker 17 had been noted as unremarkable. There had been no one on the road. I reached the southern terminal, wrote my notes, and drove back to the town where the team was staying. At dinner, I mentioned the man on the road. My colleague, who had done upland work in that region before, asked me where I had seen him. Kilometer 17. She looked at me differently then. Not frightened, she was not a frightened person, but careful. She said that a man had been seen at that marker before, not recently. Years ago, the field notes from a previous assessment team, which she had reviewed during project preparation, mentioned a man on the road near kilometer 17 who had warned the team about surface conditions. The notes described him in the same terms: dark jacket, work trousers, standing still. The surface conditions he had flagged at the time were real. The team had confirmed them. That assessment was in 2009. She checked the report. The engineer who had seen him in 2009 had noted the encounter as a local resident with local knowledge, someone who clearly knew the road. He had not thought more of it. I thought more of it. Over the following 2 days, I drove that road 4 more times as required by the assessment protocol. Each time I reached kilometer 17 at a different hour. Once in the morning, once at midday, once in the late afternoon, once in near darkness when I was running behind schedule. I saw him on 3 of those 4 passes. On one of those occasions, I stopped and we spoke briefly again. He said the same thing in essentially the same words. The road is not good further along. It has been like that for some time. When I told him I had seen him before, he looked at me without apparent surprise. He said yes, he knew. I asked him, "How often do you come out here?" He said he was usually here. On the final pass, near the end of the assessment week, I stopped again at marker 17. He was there. I asked him, and I am aware of how strange this sounds, whether he was aware that people had been seeing him for many years, whether he understood that someone had seen him here in 2009 and here again now. He said he had not counted the years. I asked whether he knew the road was going to be resurfaced, whether he knew things would change. He looked down the road ahead, the northward direction, for a long moment. Then he said, "It doesn't usually change." The resurfacing contract was approved 6 months later. I have not returned to that road, but I think about the phrasing. It doesn't usually change, not it hasn't changed before, not I've been waiting, just it doesn't usually change. The surface conditions he flagged on the first day, the ones I had noted as unremarkable, I reviewed my measurements when I got back to the office. At kilometer 17, the base grade had a subtle longitudinal crack running along 40 meters of the center line. It had been there long enough that the edges of the crack were worn smooth. I had driven past it on the outbound leg and not flagged it. I was going to drive past it again on the return without flagging it. He was right. The road was not good there. It had been like that for some time. I don't know what he was. I'm not going to pretend I have a framework for it. What I know is that he was at kilometer 17 the last time someone assessed that road, and he was at kilometer 17 when I assessed it, and whatever the interval is between those 2 events, he appears to have been there for all of it, waiting, not following, not approaching, just there at the same point, with the same information, doing what he had apparently always done. I don't find that comforting. It is actually one of the more unsettling things I can imagine, a presence with a permanent address, a fixed point, thing that is simply where it is. Every time someone comes that way, patient enough that the years don't figure into it. He wasn't looking for anyone in particular. He wasn't following the team from 2009 or following me. He was just there at marker 17 because marker 17 was where he was. Whoever came down that road would find him there, in the dark jacket, with the same words ready. I wonder sometimes whether the road being resurfaced changes anything, whether the work crews will find him at that marker, whether he will tell them the same thing, whether they will write it down the same way the 2009 team wrote it down. Local resident, local knowledge, and move on. The extra seat, I'm going to tell this plainly because I do not have another way to tell it. I have repeated this account to 3 people, and I always tell it the same way, not because I lack feeling about it, because the feeling is not the part that matters. I traveled from Accra to my father's hometown in the Brong-Ahafo region for my uncle's funeral, a long journey by road, roughly 6 hours by the coach services that run the inter-regional route. I had done this trip many times. I knew the coaches, the stops, the rhythm of the journey. The coach was full when I boarded. I found my assigned seat and settled in. The seat beside me was occupied by a man who appeared to be in his late 50s. He was well dressed in a dark suit, carrying a small bag, with the manner of someone traveling for a formal occasion. We nodded to each other. He said he was going to the same town. I assumed he was attending the same funeral, or knew the family. In that region, for that kind of gathering, this was not unusual. He was quiet for the first 2 hours. We stopped at a roadside junction, and several passengers got off to buy food. My neighbor remained seated. He declined when I asked if he needed anything. When I returned, he was speaking to the woman in the seat ahead of us. They seemed to know each other slightly, talking in a regional dialect. I did not follow fluently. He referred to my uncle by name. He said my uncle had been a good man. I ate. We drove. About 4 hours in, I noticed something I cannot explain fully. I noticed it as a logistics person notices things as a problem in the count. The coach had a fixed number of seats. The number of passengers I could see around me did not match the number of occupied seats I had observed at boarding. There was one extra, not a missing passenger, an extra one. I am aware this could be explained as miscounting. I counted again. I counted a 3rd time. I did not mention it to anyone. When we arrived, passengers began collecting bags from the overhead space. The man beside me stood, straightened his jacket, and waited his turn in the aisle. Then he moved with the crowd toward the door. I followed outside the coach. I looked for him. He was not in the group around the vehicle, not at the roadside food stalls, not on the path toward the town center. At the gathering that evening, I mentioned to my aunt that I had traveled with a man who knew the family, an older man in a suit, well-dressed, polite. She asked me to describe him. I described him. She looked at me in a way I did not like. She said that the description I had given matched a man who had died 3 years before my uncle, an old friend of my uncle's, someone they had grown up with together. She said his name. I said I did not know what to tell her. She said that this man had loved my uncle very much and that it was not surprising. In the way she said that, in the way of someone who had grown up understanding that presence does not always require a living body, that he would have come to see my uncle off. I am a logistics coordinator. I process facts. Here's what I can say. There was an extra seat's worth of occupied space on that coach. A man sat beside me for 6 hours. He knew my uncle's name. He was not there when we arrived. I don't ask people about it anymore. Their explanations are always more comfortable than mine. 7 tonight. I hope you're still comfortable. That last one tends to stay with people. The count being off, the way he knew the name. You don't have to do anything with any of this. These are not instructions. They're just accounts, things people noticed or failed to notice in time, or are still living with. Take what follows you home. Leave the rest. The lights you can put back on whenever you're ready. But before you go, check the count when you can, not just here in general. Good night.